to be clear, you don't like the idea of a wealth tax. What about raising, for example, capital gains in the same way that Stan Druckenmiller was talking about?
I mean, I think we need to just take a step back and ask what problem we're trying to solve. And if the problem we're trying to solve is that rich people have too much money, I don't think that's a problem, and I don't think the tax code should be used in some sort of a punitive way in order to try and reduce the amount of money or the amount of wealth or income that people at the top enjoy. If instead we think, that there are some important programs that we could put in place that can help push economic opportunity further down the income distribution, and we need to raise revenue to pay for those programs rather than paying for them through the deficit, then I think we should look at what is the most efficient and reasonable way to raise that revenue as we can. And again, looking at the top 0.001% for that revenue, certainly those folks should be paying their fair share. But the smaller the group you're targeting, the more opportunities there are to game the system. We know the estate tax doesn't make much money. We know that if you were to crank the top income tax up to 90%, that wouldn't raise much money either. And so it seems to me that the point is more punitive toward the rich than it is to actually solve problems. And I object to the tax code being used that way.
Hey, Seth, answer that piece of it, but also the practicalities of a wealth tax itself.
At the top, I mean, the 0.01% have as much wealth as the bottom 80%. In the analysis of Senator Warren's wealth tax is that it would raise $2.7 trillion over the next 10 years. I mean, you can argue about that figure, but it's certainly in that type of ballpark, which is, could do just an enormous amount of good. And I think, the practicalities, I think the bottom line with the experiences of our estate tax and other taxes is taxes don't work when we cut them repeatedly, when we don't enforce them, when we allow high-income people to avoid and evade them. But if you actually design a tax to work.
The issue with the wealth tax specifically, and the reason I asked you about the practicalities of it is, think about all of the illiquid assets that wealthy people are in possession of, and how those assets are going to be valued or quote-unquote marked, if you will, and all the gamesmanship and gaming that will ultimately take place.
And also that it is double taxation, right? Unless you got it through a death where it was never marked up. But most wealth is you've already paid once. Do we want to just get rid of the notion that double taxation is something we want to avoid? I mean that's fine. If you want to do it, fine. But most of this money you paid taxes on it once while you're accruing it.
Can I say one thing? I mean, so most of the wealth of the super wealthy has actually not been taxed because we don't tax on
that's what I said. That's what I said. It's a state that's it's been marked up and not taxed. That's different than someone who's a self-made millionaire or billionaire who paid income tax on it the first time around. If you're going to tax his wealth, then admit you're going to double tax it, right?
But they usually won't have paid. I mean, it's usually the capital gains is the route to this enormous wealth. But can I just say, the top 0.1%, 80% of their assets are publicly traded or regularly traded assets, right? So we're not it is easy to track the net worth of someone like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. We can do that on a day-to-day basis. This is not terribly hard.
But in terms of you don't think that. But again, going back to the gaming issue, you don't think that most wealthy individuals would actually sell some of those stocks? Now, you'd capture some of that if you raise the capital gains and try to move it into private assets that would be much harder to track. There are unintended consequences that would happen as a result of this in terms of how people would try to restructure their assets. No?
I think a 2% tax, a tax of 2 cents on every dollar, I'm not sure would cause people to, radically, totally go out of publicly held assets. I mean, I'm not sure about
here's
that.
the issue, though. If you look, there used to be 20 countries in Europe that had a wealth tax. Now there are 4, really 3. 2 of those, it's Norway and Spain. They only raise about 1/3 of what they expected to raise. So even the 4 that are left are probably going to get rid of it. And the problem is not just the liquidity issue of how you sell something, but how you value something that's most of the wealthy, aside from Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and those who made their wealth from publicly traded stock, most of the wealthy have private companies that are difficult to value, difficult to sell, and difficult to monetize quickly to get liquidity from every year. So Larry Summers, not exactly the most conservative economist, has come out against a wealth tax as saying it's not practical.
So the two economists who were behind Senator Warren's wealth tax responded to a lot of those claims yesterday, and I think I think their argument was very convincing.
Right.
But I think the bottom line
hope.
is, unlike Europe, where they designed wealth taxes that had all kinds of exemptions, and then in Europe, of course, it's much easier in Europe to move to other countries within Europe. Whereas the only way of getting around a wealth tax in the United States would be to completely relinquish one's U.S. citizenship.
Right.
And at that point, we would impose a wealth tax. So I think, to simply throw up our hands, obviously other countries have had
and we have a wealth
challenges,
tax. We have property taxes. We have capital gains taxes. Those are taxes that most of those countries in Europe that have wealth tax don't have.
Right, and property tax.
Those are
taxes
kind
on
of wealth
middle-class
taxes,
people,
right? The capital gains tax is a tax on income. On the income you receive when you sell the capital gain. Look, they're just enormous practical difficulties.
Michael,
here.
I think on your end, Michael, there's two issues going on here. One is I think you have a view, and I don't want to speak for you, but about the practicalities of actually how you would do it. By the way, I don't disagree with you. I think there are lots of issues about how to make that happen. But I think there's a larger philosophical view that you have, which is that actually we shouldn't be raising taxes. My question to you is, how are we? Well, let me ask it this way: do you think we need to raise revenue? Do you look at the current budget where we are, and I'm sure you'd like to get rid of entitlements and other things, but do you say to yourself that as a country we need to do more and we probably need more money to do it? When you talk about trying to raise the bottom, I saw a statistic, this will freak you out. This is a disgrace. The median net worth of a black Bostonian, did you see this article? $8 in Boston. So you have to say to yourself, there's something fundamentally wrong in this country, and the question is, how do you fix it?
I think the fundamentals of the country are pretty sound. Do I think we need more revenue? Yes, I do think we need more revenue. I think our deficit situation is out of control. I think given demographic pressures that we face over the coming years and decades, we need to increase revenue share of GDP. And I think it's reasonable to raise that revenue in a progressive way. I'm in favor of progressive tax structures. So I think the question is, how do you do that? And where do you go to get that revenue that will cause the least economic distortions, that will be the most efficient, and that will actually be enforceable, be a way to get the revenue? And there are a whole bunch of places I would look before going after the wealth of 75,000 U.S. families,
Okay,
as Senator Warren
give me three.
wants to do.
What would you do?
Well, one would be to continue closing tax expenditures, to broaden the tax base. We made some progress on that with the 2017 Trump tax law, but we still spend a lot of money through the tax code. That would be the first place that I would look.
Like what?
Like what? Like the exemption for employer provided health insurance is one. We still have a large mortgage interest deduction in the tax code.
How about carried interest? How about 1031 exchanges? We could really get down the list, but you're not touching any of the real high-priced stuff.
The largest is employer provided health insurance. By far. So I certainly am, targeting the where we're spending the money, and then look and see what are our actual revenue needs. What do we want to spend money on, and make decisions that way, rather than using the tax code as a way to punish people at the top for having been successful.